Well, hello to everybody, and thanks for tuning in. And thanks to Run Wild Vancouver for reaching out to us on our end. Thanks to Eric for spearheading our team and getting us involved and lining up most of the speakers here. And thanks to Run Wild for helping to facilitate the funds that we've raised for search and rescue, which is fantastic. So we are going to do the first 45-ish minutes between the four of us. I'm going to start for 7 to 10 minutes right now. Throw to Ryan and Eric, and then Jeanelle will finish off, and then we'll do some Q&A afterwards, collectively for all of us. So some of the topics that I've been tasked with discussing, first and foremost, is how did lockdown initially affect your training and competing? I had the super good fortune of having my event, as most of you would know, being the Barkley Marathons, essentially being canceled the day after I did my final run in my entire training block, which was a 12-hour overnight 21,000-foot vertical run. Not 48 hours later, I learned the fate of of that race and essentially my season and my goals for what is now 5 years of approaching. Essentially, you know, we're all really going through a collective trauma with what's happening right now with the COVID-19 coronavirus outbreak. And there's a mourning process that happens when you find your big goal for the year falling by the wayside. The 7 stages of depression, as there are the 7 stages of grief. Number 1 is shock. And certainly after 5 years of trying to get this stupid race done and having one of the best training blocks of my entire life and feeling like it was almost an all but foregone conclusion with where my fitness was at. Shock hit me hard when I realized that it might not be happening. Second is denial. And certainly I was struggling with accepting what was happening and why it was happening. Third is anger, and was very angry for many days afterwards. The fourth stage is bargaining. Fifth is depression. With the bargaining side of things, I found myself in a state of between denial, anger, and bargaining of really trying to figure out a solution for how I could still race the Barkley Marathons in Tennessee. Everything from sneaking across the border to going to the United States weeks in advance and holding up with extended family, to being in Tennessee for a month if necessary, like really going through all of this process of, I will do absolutely anything to make this happen, before the realization that it just wasn't going to happen. And stage 5 is depression. And it really hit me hard. Everybody knows this has been a very long-term goal for me. And more than anything, I want to put it behind me. And when the final realization that it was going to be at least another year set in, I went from being, you know, probably the fittest I've been, certainly in many years, if not in my entire pursuit of this goal, to struggling massively for a full calendar month, and struggled through depression and had no motivation and was truly very sad and really struggling. We have a coaching business, as you know, and the coaching show must go on. And it was very difficult for me to still connect with my athletes. I talked to everybody on a bi-weekly basis, and it was challenging that first week, especially, to be present for my runners where I was suffering so much internally from what was happening. So, and then stage 6 is testing or seeking realistic solutions. And 7 is acceptance. Stage 8 is what the heck now? And it is, at this point now, a few months clear of this, feel a little bit fortunate for the fact that it happened early. And I realize that that's not the case for everybody. Many of you right now are only this week, finding out that your big goal races for the year are falling by the wayside. UTMB was just canceled a few days ago. All the biggies are falling off the calendar. So what I really want to preach first and foremost is there is a grieving process, and it's different for everybody. And you may have already proceeded through some of that process when we all realize that any race is happening right now is far-fetched or unlikely. But don't be hard on yourself and allow the emotional process to unfold. You need to be kind to yourself and to to get through this process, to get to a point where you can find motivation again and find inspiration again. And again, for me, it took a full month for that to happen. So after about 30 days, I almost snapped to. I woke up and just was like, what the heck is going on? Racing doesn't define me. It never has. It's an end goal, and it's a means to an end to be as fit and as healthy and as active as I possibly can. So I was able to rally from that and then start looking at what might motivate me to do a little bit more than just lifestyle fitness. No matter what happens, many of us, we love to be active. We love to get outside. It is our church. It is our mental health. It is everything to us. And we don't need races and bibs to motivate us to get out the door. I find that we do need some form of a big goal to motivate us to do that extra 20 or 30% more. So for me, at that point, I had to assess, how are people going to leave your mark on 2020? Because it's going to be remembered as one of the worst years in human history. And we now have to initiate action within ourselves to ensure that even beyond that, we can still pull positives from this year. We still hold the power to do that for ourselves and for the people around us. So how are we going to pull lifelong positive memories from 2020 when we're being challenged so much on a day-to-day basis with all the negative that is unfolding around us? So for me and for a lot of us, virtual runs start popping up everywhere, and there's no shortage of them. There are lots of options, but it was something for me to pull me out of my funk. So I needed something to get me moving after that month of really struggling. And I signed up for that Aravapa strong event where you could choose distances from, I think, as short as 5 up to 100 miles. Jumped on my treadmill and stayed on it for almost 26 hours to cover a 100-mile distance, and ended up with this nice little souvenir. And the crazy thing about this belt buckle, to me, it first and foremost is the slowest 100-miler I've ever run. But secondly, it means so much to me. I didn't think it would really be so special, but this buckle, amongst my collection of personal achievements, means as much or more than many other ones, because there was so much more behind getting to that point. So maybe a virtual run is something to seriously consider. Beyond that, the last thing that I'll touch on from my side of things, and what's really now got me massively motivated and back to being myself and back to getting up and prioritizing my fitness, prioritizing my mental health, prioritizing getting outside, no matter the weather, no matter the conditions, no matter how stressful the day may be, no matter how much work I have in front of me. That only happens when I have big goals in front of me. And I've now looked around locally. We as a family relocated to Chilliwack from North Vancouver almost exactly 1 year ago. And historically, I, as we know, direct events in the summertime, Squamish 50, Whistler Alpine Meadows, and many others. And my summer months are compromised by my events in terms of being able to actually adventure and train and do big things. And this for me is a one-off. It is the one summer in 10 years, and hopefully the only summer in the next 10 years, where I won't be producing races, which won't be my absolute priority, which is preventative to me doing big training weeks and pursuing big training or big mountain goals. I've found a way to spin this to embrace the positive amongst all of the negative. And when I look out my window and look out my door and in my backyard here in Chilliwack, I see a huge playground of untapped potential. And I've essentially laid out 4 huge goals for myself this summer for mountain link-ups. They are either link-ups that I have no evidence of them being done before, or have no evidence of them being done in a fast manner, in a single day versus multiple days. I can't achieve these without staying diligent to my training as I would if I was pursuing a race. So my motivation has become backyard adventures. And for those of us who are in British Columbia and the Lower Mainland, we're not shy on opportunity here. And I hope anyone else that's tuning in, the 61 other people, wherever you find yourselves, have great opportunities close to home as well. So for me, it is embracing the negative, finding positives, and then picking big, lofty goals that are right out my back door that I can't accomplish if I don't dedicate myself to the next few months of ensuring I'm getting as much training in as possible. The final thing, pick a date and make a plan. I've picked dates. Those dates will be malleable. It might be plus or minus a few days or even a week or so. But when you pick a date, you make it real. So I've got an August 1st date for a goal that I want to accomplish on the Cheam Range here in Squamish, in Chilliwack. And that's what I'm working towards right now. And again, whether that's plus or minus a few days, weather-based or whatnot. But now I've got a deadline and now I've got something to work towards. And I'm finding this to actually be more inspiring than I have found some races and putting on a bib to be. So that's my take on how the lockdown has affected my training, my competing, and how I've found a way to accept our current reality and then try to put a positive mark on what is going to be my 2020 season of adventuring and pursuing goals, but not putting on a race bib at all.
That's awesome, Gary.
Thanks, Gary.
Looking forward to seeing what those 4 objectives are. I think that's a really cool way of framing it in such a way that, you know, you're taking some of the aspects of your original goal and then trying to work that into like the more local adventure goal. So it's, you know, it's not like you're doing a complete 180 in terms of the objective.
Yeah.
It's partially just relocating.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, my name is Eric. Oh, I think Kate wants
Sorry, Eric, not to interrupt you, but I just realized I didn't do a little piece of housekeeping that I just wanted to make sure that all of our participants knew about. And that is that there is a Q&A function at the bottom of the screen there. So I'm sure that you guys are probably quite inspired by everything that you're hearing from our presenters. And you may have questions for everyone who's here today. So please know that I'll be monitoring the Q&A forum, and just shoot out any question you have and we'll get to them at the end. There's going to be a set time for Q&A. Thanks.
Yeah. Also, to add to that housekeeping, if it wasn't clear to anyone, there's 3 nights of these events, right? And so we have tonight, we have 3 speakers, and then a week from tonight, next Thursday, we have 3 more speakers, and the following week. So anybody that's participating or has come tonight, we're hoping to see you again these next 3 nights, right?
Thanks, Eric.
Awesome. So Ryan and I are going to kind of chat just a little bit more about actual training during COVID. So yeah, my colleague to the looker's left, Ryan Kerrigan in Vermont. Yeah, so we are also partners with Gary and Jeanelle. And so it's been quite interesting just working with our athletes and kind of going through these same conversations that Gary just gave us a really good example with. But we also have some very practical questions about training right now. One of the most common being, is training hard safe, and is doing these challenges safe during a time when we're worried about getting sick, or we're worried about lowering our immune system, potentially putting others at risk. And so, especially when we're talking about things like 100 miles on a treadmill, or, how many thousands of meters Jeanelle's going to do next week. These are fairly intense events, it seems like, and we want to make sure that that's safe. So, this was a really interesting thing for me, because I have seen a lot of anecdotal and scientific evidence around this. And so my kind of research background, it was really interesting to have a look. And it's very clear that we see, when people do participate in these kind of mass gathering events, so like a road marathon or an ultra, there is a big increase in susceptibility to any kind of viral or bacterial illness. And that is a risk that you have when you participate in one of these events. And so there's lots of kind of vectors or touch points that you can imagine at these events. But the real question is, does the actual bout of exercise increase that risk, or is it something surrounding that event. And so that's really what I was looking into. And it kind of turns out that the exercise itself, even a very intense exercise, bout of exercise, isn't actually implicated in this increased risk of illness. It's way more likely that the just lack of physical distancing that we're all kind of learning about right now is the culprit for this increase in risk at these events. So you can imagine, like Ryan, we've definitely experiencst.
I love you, Eric. I wish I could be there with you now.
Yeah. Physical distance is great at the moment, but there's lots of examples at a race where that is not the case, right? Whether it's the check-in line, getting into the corral, scooping the M&Ms out of the feed station. Like there's so many spots on that list where you're coming into very close contact with someone and many other people, and then all their respective people. So that's really most likely the main factor there. But one of the cool things is that we're learning all these things right now that really kind of take away all those touch points. So not only are we not going to these mass gathering events, the races, but we're learning all these things like maintaining just like hand hygiene. We're washing our hands, we're avoiding common surfaces and cleaning common surfaces, things like transit, and just being too close to someone, being physically within that range. And so I think when you actually look at really highly elite athletes, I don't know if this is a question I had for you, Ryan. When you look at these really successful athletes, I think kind of in my anecdotal experience, a lot of them have been practicing these physical distancing measures that we're all learning now, but they've been doing that for a long time. Like, I think that's a trait of an elite athlete.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I work a lot with younger athletes in the winter, cross-country skiers, and a big thing for me, especially in colder conditions and Nordic venues on the East Coast or most parts of the world being pretty outdated and not having a lot of places for athletes to stretch out, is right after a really exertive race, we're highly susceptible to getting ill. And it's, changing your shirt, getting nutrients in right away, getting hydration right away, getting away from people for just a little while until you start feeling better, going for a little cool down, and just giving yourself some space. It's really hard to visualize, especially as junior athletes or someone who's starting off as a more full-time and more serious athlete. But I feel like putting that distance in and getting hydration and nutrients in right away, warm clothes in cold conditions, is definitely a huge step in maintaining a healthy lifestyle.
Yeah. So I think, just thinking about this going forward, if we have athletes that are worried about an intense exercise bout, the big things are just following all these common recommendations that we have. And then I think, to your point, adding on top of that, really monitoring just stress, right? Like we talk about stress in terms of normal training stress, and then we talk about non-training stress, and how both of those kind of come together to lead to potentially overtraining, right? And that's really what we want to avoid. So while the risk of an acute exercise bout is very small at increasing your illness risk, it is once we start pushing into that overtraining zone, that's where illness risk does increase.
Sure. Yeah, and I think we can characterize overtraining as any training that takes us beyond 2 or 3 days of full recovery. And so those who are reaching forward, I've seen a lot of posts lately from people who have had the opportunity, people who are otherwise fantastic athletes, who've had the opportunity to be out of work and to be able to pursue their 100-mile or marathon goals more so time than they ever thought possible. And they're reaching for back-to-back 100-mile weeks for 7-8 weeks at a time. Maybe these family and job impediments were there for you for a good reason to keep you distracted from running yourself into the ground. So yeah, I think it's important to take that into consideration and realize that there is a limit to how much we can do. Even if we have all the time in the world, there's a limit to how much training we can absorb.
Yeah. And that really rolls into nicely one of our next questions is, how are we a lot of our athletes have all this newfound time, and is it reasonable to change how we increase our training volume just because we have extra time? So I think kind of the specific question is, what is a reasonable increase in training volume?
Yeah, I mean, generally, I think all of us at Ridgeline follow a 10% weekly increase recommendation. And I'll let you elaborate on that a little more, Eric.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty simple. And I don't think all of a sudden not having other responsibilities necessarily, this is obviously isn't everybody, but some, but all of a sudden having extra free time doesn't mean you all of a sudden have the go ahead to bump volume by 20 or 30%, right? Like, we still want to follow these basic principles that we use normally.
Sure.
And then also kind of really thinking about, okay, maybe we are bumping up training a little bit faster than we might have otherwise. What can we do to kind of mitigate injury while we're doing that? Like, how are we being careful about increasing that training? I think is really important to talk about.
Yeah, I think it comes down to, number one, of course, as you were talking about, our training volume, how much training we're doing throughout the week in proportion to what our life was like pre-COVID, and ramping things up in proportion. And also thinking about the surfaces that we're training on. If we usually are able to get out of, if you live in the city, and usually very easily be able to get out of the city to get to trail conditions that serve your training purpose for your trail races, etc. And all of a sudden you're racking those miles on pavement, particularly with non-pavement specific shoes. And just looking at all of those forces coming together and realizing that we can only adapt to so much change in a given training cycle.
Yeah, I think the surfaces is a huge one that we don't think about normally when we have, and especially when we're really lucky and we have options of trail, road, and maybe treadmill and bike in the gym. Like often we have a lot of options, and now we're finding ourselves with very few. And a lot of people, like I specifically think of 2 athletes that we work with that are purely limited to pavement right now. And so those guys, they can't increase their volume right now. They can't do that same bump up. And so until they have a treadmill option or a trail option that's reasonable, we're actually dialing things back a little bit for those guys. So that's super critical. I think the other one that I would mention is just general cross training. And that's like a key kind of cornerstone of all of our training philosophy in general. But again, it's just gotten kind of trickier here, when you can't go to the gym to ride the spin bike or to use the elliptical machine. All of a sudden cross training gets much easier, but that's just much harder. Cross training is just a really key portion of the training plan that we use in general. And so a lot of the athletes that I work with are cross training at least once a week. Very few of them are purely running 6 days a week. I would say that's almost not a thing in our training program. And that's just it's huge for longevity, being able to still exercise, but not have that added strain, added pounding. Yeah.
Yeah, especially as a lot of people are coming out of winter sports, which may be more ski specific, or even if you're just running on different terrain, and being able to have those non-pounding, less pounding activities, I can never get over it. As much as I ski throughout the winter, whether it's cross country skiing or alpine touring, etc., I can't run for 45 minutes without getting sore after that. So even once all the snow is gone, or even if I've been running in the snow, it's different than running on hard trail, or certainly different than running on hard gravel, and definitely than road. So just ramping those activities up differently, because they all are unique, and we can use cross training to fuel that aerobic base to keep us rolling in a different dimension and build up all of our aerobic base.
Yeah.
And
I think just practically, like for the athlete right now that doesn't have any other cross training option, like the gym is closed, they don't have a bike, and so it's like running or what? For me, the couple athletes that we were in that situation with, like just going for walks and hikes really is a suitable alternative, right? Like, it's still on your feet. So like if your feet are really sore, like actual feet are really sore, you're not getting quite that break that you would if you went swimming or something, but you are avoiding the strain on the knees and the joints that you would get from running. So hiking isn't something that I had previously really considered a cross training method as much, and didn't prescribe so much, but I've found that it's really actually quite useful in the last couple of months for those athletes. So I think it's easy to forget about, but a really useful one. The last question that I want to cover before we toss it to Jeanelle is just about the athletes that are dialing back their training. Whether it's because work has gotten more stressful, or because family life has gotten more complicated, whatever the reason may be, or just motivation. Like it can be, my races are all postponed to next year, and so I don't see the need to dedicate as many hours per week right now as I was planning to, or whatever. And just like thinking about, will I lose my fitness if I'm dialing back this training, and how does that kind of look? And so one of the things that I kind of think about, and Gary definitely touched on this, but really just maintaining that life balance is key. And I think that's something, again, we all kind of incorporate into our training and our programming for athletes generally. But like if your life is kind of being unbalanced by training at the moment, then training really kind of probably should be the first thing to let slide. Like there's not too many situations where that should come before, work or family or basically anything else.
We're always people first and athletes second, no matter what.
Totally. But again, from like a practical standpoint, like it can be a little confusing. Like, do you run once a week instead of 3 times a week, or instead of 5 times a week? That can be a little tricky to navigate. And I think one way that I kind of like to think about detraining is more like thinking about it as a taper. Like I'm just in an extended taper for this next event, or an extended recovery period. And when we talk about tapers and recovery periods, for us, for me, one of the most critical things I think is to keep the actual number of sessions that you do during the week the same, or just slightly lower than you would have been before. So say you're a 6-day-a-week runner. If you can bring that back to 5 days a week, and just have those be really short sessions, even if it's, again, just like a short hike or a short walk, still maintaining that pattern that you would have in your normal training, but keeping it on a much smaller level. I think that's really important. Yeah,
I agree with everything there, and just maintaining the general training rhythm while ratcheting back the volume and the intensity a little bit.
Yeah. And I think generally the intensity would be the first thing that I would let go, and really just like keeping the easy volume as the priority there. Just very short, easy sessions with the occasional short and intense intensity, if that's something that's kind of on your radar, but really not critical. I think one of the nice things about especially being a lifelong athlete, is that these like fitness losses, any detraining, is actually really shockingly easy to regain. I don't know if you can talk about that in terms of some of your cross-country athletes.
Yeah, we had a communication with an athlete today who was, he was he won the New England championships as a U14 ski racer just some years ago, and had the unfortunate incident of he actually broke his own leg just with the musculature in his body. There was no contact, no impact, anything. He's just such a strong individual. He was playing a sports game and ended up somehow fracturing his own femur with his own musculature, which is really, really weird and unfortunate for this great young athlete. And he has, especially at that age, as a U16 athlete, it's a really challenging time to get any injury, especially an injury that no one really understands. So seeing him come back now stronger than ever, and battling those little things of just kind of realigning his musculature, and just seeing him get that confidence back. And at that age, it's so difficult to, 6 months or a year seems like an eternity. And it's kind of, poking fun at it. It's kind of, you feel it's kind of like sorry, not sorry thing, but to see them moving forward now, and just imagine that from a older athlete's perspective, and it really is a very short path back to success, especially after only a few months long incident.
Every single one of us right now, Ryan, understands that a few months can feel like an eternity.
Yeah.
We should pitch to Jeanelle here briefly, if you guys want to wrap the portion of things.
Yeah, Jeanelle. So Jeanelle has been really our primary strength training coach here at Ridgeline Athletics, and she's operating a really cool strength program that we're running. And so she's gonna just cover a bit about why we strength train, and some kind of how we move through it in the season. So off to Jeanelle. She's down there.
Awesome. Hi guys. Thanks everyone for being here. So I guess Ryan's little quick story is actually a decent prelude into my topic of strength training. And for my own peace of mind, I've put together a few little silly slides just so that it's not all video and not all me the whole time. So I'm just going to jump into that. I put together the strength training programs for us at Ridgeline, as Eric just said. I want to chat with you guys tonight quickly about why we strength train. Slides are good, team? Yeah, okay.
That's great.
So I know many of us, especially a lot of us, are all outdoor adventurers. So myself included, many of us would just rather be out there hiking, running, adventuring, perhaps instead of putting in that time, whether that's in your gym or your basement or whatever that looks like for strength training. And especially right now, perhaps your situation looks a lot different with your gyms being closed. I've been doing workouts in my closet. I'm not sure about the rest of you, but getting it done. So with all of that being said, it is still a really important piece of what we do as athletes and as adventurers. Strength training is really critical just to that ability to be able to adventure and continue to get outside, and get outside for longer bouts of time as well. So we do our strength training because strength training equals increased outdoor fun time, is my perspective. Even if that fun time is perhaps horrible and terrible because you're doing intervals outside or whatever that looks like, it's still obviously a lot of fun to be able to have the endurance and strength to go outside for hours on end. Like Gary was talking about his 12-hour overnight adventure. A lot of that comes from him investing the time in his strength training as well, as I'm very confident that he does.
Yeah, and I'll interject with a quick side story there to validate my side of things from the strength. So Jeanelle is our strength coach, and she is designing all of our programs, our plans. For me personally, two topics that are really worth discussing with the strength component are the aging athlete and injuries. I'm 43 now, and anybody that finds themselves crossing over from their 30s into their 40s undeniably notices a change in their recovery and their ability to get injured from training. So as we age, strength training becomes a much more important part of what we're doing. You're invincible in your 20s. You can get through your 30s, generally being a little bit reckless. But certainly by the time you get in your late 30s and into your 40s, you really need to be strategic about how you go about keeping your body healthy and keeping it moving. So for me, I had battled with injuries for the last 2 years. They were all left side injuries. I had a neck of femur stress fracture on my left side. I had a sacral stress fracture on my left side. And then I had an iliac bone stress reaction on my left side. And I'm finally, it seems like, free of this injury cycle. It's now been 6 months clear real estate. And the two reasons that I found myself finally appearing to get clear of that, first and foremost, my strength coach was my first ever coach. She lives in New Zealand now, works with Olympians, happened to be back in Whistler last year, saw the injuries I was up against, specifically met with me for the day and assessed what was going on. And I was collapsing in my hips on the left side, was overcompensating on my right side, and was leading to additional stress forces on the left side of my body. And they were finding the weakest point to break down all of those stress outside of the femur, but certainly the sacrum and the iliac bone, smaller bones. So she designed a very specific strength program for me that I've been doing now for the last 8-9 months. And that has made a massive difference to my core, my strength, and my balance. And then secondly, I found the root cause, I believe, of those injuries, which was a foot issue that I've resolved. So we have to recognize that as we get a little bit older or as we battle with injuries, if you want to keep doing running, it is one of the hardest sports on your body, as we were talking about, the stress forces. It's a high impact activity. Skiing and biking are low impact activities. Because of that, you generate stress forces in your body, and you need to find a way to become resilient and strong. And the older you get, the more homework you have to do to continue to be a long distance runner. I'll throw back to you, Jeanelle.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great point. Running is really a catabolic exercise. I thought this was quite hilarious. My quads are on fire. So it's true, especially as we age, our metabolism changes, and running itself is just exercise that's fantastic, but it breaks down our muscles and it's an impacting exercise. So our strength piece and not neglecting strength is super important to make sure that our muscles can take that impact. And investing just 2 to 3 times a week can really provide your body with the core strength and especially the balance. I work one-on-one with some athletes doing strength programming and strength training, and it's really helpful because you can sometimes either yourself or a strength coach can pick up those imbalances, and that piece is super huge too, like Gary spoke to. Because yes, if you have imbalances and then you're trying to constantly put that one foot in front of the other and you're running, that can eventually, once you're in your 40s, Gary, no, at any time, that can lead to some breakdown. It's not just with age, it can happen earlier, but it happens. So it is really a key piece of why I'm passionate about strength, is because it provides our body that ability to endure, is I guess the easiest way to summarize it. Fall and winter training versus spring training and summer training to me is like a bear versus a bikini. So in the wintertime, bears take in, we've been talking a lot about bears in Ridgeline, but anyways, bears go into this hibernation mode during fall and into the winter time. And so I look at fall and winter training as our time that we're gaining mass, and not just unuseful mass, but mass in respect with our strength training. Our strength training in the winter time is about doing bigger lifts and working a bigger muscle belly and building a bigger muscle belly, so that when you go into the summertime and you're wanting to be in your bikini and working more catabolic exercises, you have that big muscle belly to endure you through the summer. So fall winter training versus spring summer training is like the bear versus the bikini. In the winter time, we're going to be doing a lot of heavier, bigger lifts, working squats, lunges, deadlifts, pulls. In the spring and summertime, we're going to work on more lean, sport-specific exercises and sport-specific muscle. And why is that? So we want to work on those two different components because, like I said, you want the muscle from winter. You want to build that base of muscles so that you can use it during your season. So if perhaps you're more of like a winter athlete, you would have it in reverse. But you want your muscle to be specific to the season that you need it for. In the spring and summertime, I put our athletes through a lot of unilateral, multiplanar, full body movement. That looks like skaters, and we're working explosive step-ups, box jump burpees, 360 lunges, and more. Some of our athletes have really talked about how their glutes burn from my workouts in the summertime because our programs or any of your programming should be based on doing those movements that are going to translate to your sport. So step-ups translating to trail hiking and going up mountains, and just having that full functioning, full body muscle to work with. So that's kind of the different picture of working heavy in the winter versus working light and lean and more mobile in the summer. And yeah, lastly, I'll just quickly touch on where we presently are at. We've been talking a lot with our athletes about how you have to perhaps find a bit of COVID creativity right now. Gyms are starting to reopen, but we've had a lot of time where you've perhaps had to just be doing your workouts in your closet or in your one-bedroom condo, and perhaps that can be a bit unmotivating. But I've been finding that this little bit of extra space and time has been good to make me think about why I do it, and has made me refocus on why I should strength train and why I need to strength train and have that imbalance in my week. And so our recommendation is at least 1 to 2 workouts a week, upwards of 3 workouts throughout the summertime for our athletes, mixing in some core and different exercises. And like I said, that dynamic work, and be creative at this time if you can. If you don't have the equipment while the gyms aren't open, perhaps find some milk jugs, fill your eggs, whatever you have to do, find some stuff in your house and just have fun with it. My philosophy, all my athletes know, has always been the more fun, the better. So make strength training fun, especially if it's something that you really have a challenge doing. Incorporate it now into your regime and just have some fun with it so that it's something that you'll continue to do and then will allow you to have such amazing longevity in the sport.
And to add to Jeanelle's fantastic presentation there, soft, or I guess direct sales pitch, Ridgeline Athletics does offer access to Jeanelle's specific strength program, 3 workouts per week that are updated as we go for free. You go to ridgelineathletics.com and then it's under live training plans, and you just subscribe there, and then you can be one of Jeanelle's strength athletes, and for no cost at all, you can see exactly what we've just talked about.
Yeah, awesome, Jeanelle. That was really good. Thanks. I don't even have anything to add about strength stuff, so that's sweet. I think you're still sharing your screen with us, though.
I know I don't know how to end it.
Maybe Jeff knows from the back end.
Shoot.
So with that, I think we'll throw back to Kate, and there has been some questions in the Q&A that I think Kate will bring for us.
Yeah, so Lisa has asked a question, Eric, for you, and actually, Gary, maybe you can speak to this from your perspective as a race director too. Her question is, how do you see races changing in the future? For reference to your comment about aid stations and food, etc.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to that real quick, certainly, because we still have one race on the calendar. The Whistler Alpine Meadows race is on September 25th to 27th. And we had a phone call with the RMOW, Resort Municipality of Whistler, this past Friday. And essentially that decision will be made at the end of June by July 1st. There's an event called Bryce Canyon that's happening on May 30th, believe it or not. Spartan is having a race in Jacksonville, Florida, the middle of June. Those are the only 2 events I know that are going ahead. And those events do have to follow specific protocols to allow for full physical distancing throughout. We, as a race organization, have looked at what we want to produce in September for WAM, and to produce a race with all of those restrictions does not align with our desire or how we produce events. So in terms of this year immediately, these races, essentially, you're checking in from your car. You're not leaving your vehicle when you check in. It's one person at a time at an aid station. There's more drop bags. There's less volunteers. You finish and leave. You self-serve everywhere. These are the things that need to happen currently today to allow an event to be produced. We don't want to produce an event under those restrictions because we don't feel that it is a standard that we've worked hard to attain in the last 9 years. So we're hopeful in the next 5 weeks that we'll get some easing of restrictions in British Columbia, and that's where our decision will come from. Long-term into 2021, vaccine timeline, nobody really knows what we're up against with when life will return to some semblance of normalcy. And I think what we will see is certainly a lesser version of restrictions enforced throughout 2021 on events where you might need to have staged starts. Instead of having 600 people at the Squamish 50K in a start shoot, we might have to do 50 people at a time. Races that allow pacers, for an example, we don't, but you might not be allowed pacers at an event next year. Aid stations may have lineups. You may not be allowed to just freelance an aid station with other people as you normally would. More waste may be generated by races as supplies are prepackaged rather than having big bowls of supplies and whatnot. I think these are the things that we're going to be seeing as race organizations. Unfortunately, a lot of those changes, A, lessen the community element of the race, and B, contribute to a higher carbon footprint and more waste. So it's our hope that we can find some creative solutions going forward that don't compromise either of those elements of the race specifically.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting. I mean, one really nice thing is that we have like really big demand for events and really like creative people that are trying to solve this. And there is a way to hold events post. And it's just going to take like some figuring out. That's going to be really interesting for all of us. But there's totally ways to do it, right? Like coming from a Nordic ski background, the whole just idea of interval starts is a normal thing for us that might rolling into trail running. The other thing I think just as athletes in general, maybe just being more aware of touch points and maybe not scooping into the M&M bowl, whether it's at a race or it's at like your doctor office with the candy dish. Like, athletes, I think, generally need to be extra paranoid about all that stuff.
I think what this has really established for just about all of us is the recognition of how we never thought about any form of transmission of germs or disease prior to this. I mean, it's kind of laughable how we went about our day-to-day lives prior to this and how we've had to reassess everything going forward. And I think that alone, Lisa, to your question, people are going to behave differently just because we've had to collectively as a society go through this together. We won't, a greater percentage, I would say 75 to 80% of people will never go back to their pre-habits because they just won't be comfortable doing that again. Yep, and then back to Kate. I think there might have been one more in there. I'm not sure.
Thanks, Carrie. And thanks. I think it is really interesting to think about the implications as a cult, like a society, and then also as more of a trail running cult community, that the changes we'll see. The other question for the coaches that we had was, with regards to training, are there any insights or advice on mileage total type virtual events like the Great Virtual Race across Tennessee 1000K or 5 Peaks across Canada? And are there any suggestions on training or approach?
So I'll start and throw to the team because I'm familiar with this and I want to make sure they are as well. So if you don't know, the Great Virtual Race across Tennessee is 1,000 kilometers over the summer, and you're virtually running across the state of Tennessee. I think the average distance you have to cover daily is 5 miles, 4.5 or 5 miles, so very attainable distance. The run across Canada, I don't know the exact parameters on that, but certainly something similar. So what is good about these events is that as dramatic as the total distance is, it's strategically correctly being marketed to anybody because you really can get essentially it's 35 or 40 miles. I think it's 35 miles a week that you need to get. So most people can't attain that if they already are a runner. So I think what's nice about these is that it's motivating people. My wife is partaking in the Tennessee run, and we've altered our family plan on a daily basis to get her out the door every morning for her to get her mileage in, and she's absolutely loving it. And we are appreciating that we have something to look forward to and something to inspire my wife for the duration of the summer. So that's been great for us. But specifically the training, maybe to Erica, Ryan, Jeanelle. So I guess to rework the question, if you need to do 35 to 40 miles a week and you're currently only running 20 to 25 miles a week, what would that look like for how you could get to a point where that would be comfortable?
Yeah, I'll hand off. I think, again, just tracking back to what we were talking about earlier with being very cautious about big dramatic jumps in volume, and maybe being strategic about them. So, if say you want to accomplish this goal and all of a sudden your daily volume has to increase by 25% instead of 10% or weekly, maybe some of that is hiking, or just a more more attainable style of activity. It doesn't necessarily all have to be running, and that would be one really good way to kind of mitigate that big dramatic increase in volume.
Absolutely. Yeah. Good
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah. And I'll just quickly speak to that too. Just with these different challenges, I think a big thing, there's a number of us participating in a big vertical challenge next week. And it's just talking about and considering your pace that you approach these things with. Obviously, if you're doing a week-long challenge or every single day for 2 months, you shouldn't be racing every single day, or you just have to really consider what effort am I putting into it. And then the other big piece that I've really been addressing with my athletes is not just the pace and effort that you put into it, but the recovery. We've addressed this through our chat, but the recovery that you allow your body to have as well. So it's super critical to just consider that if you're going to be doing big, long stretches of back-to-back efforts, you really got to keep in mind your fueling during those efforts so that you're not going into an even greater catabolic state of your muscles and just being left to nothing. But if you daily take care of yourself through those efforts and just hone in on effort and pace, then your body can endure a lot of things. It's just approaching it with the right mindset and more for a fun and endurance effort versus like a all balls to the walls type of way.
So next week from the 25th to the 31st, or is it 25th to when, Jeanelle? 25th to the
25th to 31st.
31st. Another virtual race from Air Vapor Running. It is the Limitless Vertical Challenge. And Jeanelle will be doing the double Everest attempt, which is over 58,000 feet of climbing in 7 days, which is beyond anything she's done like that previously. But she's also raising money for the food bank, and she's already lapsed her goal. So Jeanelle, how can people donate to your cause if they wish to?
If you find me through Facebook or Instagram, there's a link for the Facebook donation page. I chose to do it that way because 100% of the proceeds go directly to Canada Food Bank. And I'm going to be opening the window above $2,500 to the next level of $3,000 and see if we can just keep raising that bar of money raised for our food banks in Canada as it's needed at this time.
Well, you've elapsed your goal, and you were still, 4 days away from the start of it all. So congratulations. I'm sure you'll get past $3,000 on the fundraising. And then I'll pitch back to Kate if there's anything else Q&A for us.
Nope, that was the last question. Thank you all so much. You're so many great ideas, and I really appreciated the different perspectives that you brought to the table today. I think our next panelists are Alicia and Tara, and if you guys are ready, we can introduce them now.
Yeah, we want to say collaboratively from all four of us, thanks for having us. If anybody wants to ask us any questions they weren't comfortable asking tonight, you can find us at ridgelineathletics.com. There's a contact form. Any questions whatsoever, no matter how trivial you may consider them to be, please fire away. We'd love to connect with you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks for having us.